am Brett Norton with Beyond Clean. And just wanted to real quickly apologize for some of the technical difficulties we had at the beginning of the first session. As we know, sometimes when we're dealing with technology, things get a little bit glitchy, but we have fixed that. So welcome back and thanks for sticking with us. That was a great session to kick off the conference. I wanted to quickly highlight the features on the right-hand side of your screen. You have sponsor resources. You have a Q&A window, so please access that to ask questions, and also the speaker bio. One thing that I wanted to make sure to highlight, because we were cut off at the beginning last time, was we have a very important CE update that the SPD CE credits are now available throughout the conference. So all of today's conference sessions are individually approved for one CE for SPD. So at the conclusion of each conference session, your one CE certificate will be automatically downloaded for that session. For nursing credits, stay tuned to the conclusion of the conference and you'll be automatically directed to your nursing CE certificate. So hopefully all that's clear. We have some new icons, smiley face icons. You can share your reactions to the information presented throughout today's conference by simply selecting your favorite emoji. All right, let's get going. Our speakers for today's session are Michelle Sullivan. Michelle is a leading global healthcare sustainability advocate on a mission to educate healthcare professionals on the importance of environmental sustainability. And joining us for this session is none other than Mr. Hank Balch. Hank is, of course, the founder and president of Beyond Clean. He's well-known, a very well-known industry writer and social media connoisseur on a mission to equip sterile processing professionals with the skills and knowledge to fight dirty every instrument, every time. Presentation title is Healing the Planet One Procedure at a Time, Global Outlook on Sustainability. How can the healthcare industry contribute to healing our planet? As an industry, what steps should we follow to ensure we are doing our part? Michelle joins us to share her broad perspective on how the healthcare industry can successfully contribute to healing our planet. Through their compelling experiences and forward-thinking strategies, Michelle and Hank will outline the actionable steps you can follow to successfully integrate sustainability initiatives into every procedure, every time. So let's jump on into it and join me in welcoming Michelle and Hank.
Hello and welcome to this session. Really excited today to talk to Michelle Sullivan, a global healthcare sustainability advocate. And we're going to take a deep dive into all these conversations that you've already been hearing in the conference from a global scale. And you may see and hear some things that are familiar from what we've already discussed at kind of the U.S. level, but you may hear some other things that are new to the conversation. So before we get into it too far, I want to let you introduce yourself, Michelle, and thank you for coming on this conference to sharing your insight and your passion.
Thanks, Hank. I'm really happy to be here. So my name's Michelle Sullivan. I've worked in the healthcare world, whether it's pharmaceuticals or medical devices, since in the 90s, right? And I know I don't look old enough, but it's genuinely the case. And since 2000, I've been working in medical devices. I've done pretty much every job ever known to man or woman in this field, whether it's sales or marketing, market access, market development, health economics, and now environmental sustainability. And so I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about this topic. I live in the UK. And the NHS is the world's first health system to commit to net zero. And as a result of that, I'm sort of right in the forefront of this topic, living here in this country.
Yeah. Well, that's actually how I found you. We had mutual connections through a guy named Dan Kuhl, and anyone who's tuning in to the Beyond Clean side of this conference, they probably know Dan from previous interviews. But I asked him, I said, hey, who out there would you recommend that I talk to about this sustainability topic? And he was like, no questions asked. You need to go talk to Michelle because of the passion there. And I want to talk about your kind of journey into this.
Yes.
As you described, like you've been in the healthcare space, for a long time.
Yep.
But your focus on sustainability is still, fairly recent compared to your time in the industry. How did that happen? Yeah. And what kind of sparked that advocacy part of yourself?
Yeah. So I was asked maybe 2 years ago, but a bit over 2 years ago now, what's happening in the world of environmental sustainability with the company that I work for. And I said, I don't really know. Let me go and find out. And so I went to find out, and I met a load of engineers and boffins who talked to me about things that I didn't know what they were talking about. And they used terms like scope 1, 2, and 3, and megawatts, and greenhouse gas protocol, and carbon dioxide equivalent. And I was like, okay, I do not know what anybody's saying here, but it's good to know that stuff's going on, right? But I need to understand a bit more. So what I did was I went back to university and did an 8-week course with the University of Cambridge, a very prestigious organisation. They're very much at the forefront of this. They do lots of different short courses. And it sort of transformed my life. I wasn't really thinking about it. I have a son who set up a charity in this space back in 2018. And, he used to make me go and clean beaches sometimes. And I was like, for God's sake, can't believe I'm having to do this. But now I'm worse than him, so I drive him nuts with all of my accidental eco-warrior antics, because what I learnt was we're sort of at a very pivotal moment in time, and what we do over the next few years will really literally make the difference for future generations to come, my children included. And everyone likes a good purpose, Hank, right? So this is one of the best purposes you can come up with, is to start to put your energy and your input into this field of environmental sustainability and everything it entails.
So there's obviously a lot of directions that you can take that. Yeah. Why did you choose healthcare in particular? Why turn your attention to that in this broader topic of sustainability?
Okay, so other industries and sort of things that emit greenhouse gases and cause problems for the environment, a lot of them are very ahead of the curve on this. However, the healthcare is responsible for nearly 5% of all emissions that occur on the planet, carbon dioxide and other emissions. So it's a big contributor to the problem. On top of which, it's as we have discovered through the whole COVID pandemic, lots and lots of waste is created from its activities. And it's also a special case because we're dealing with people who are ill, who are going to be made better. And we're trying to make everything as perfect for the individual as we can. And yet, in doing so, it will have implications for the population and population health. And everything's all interlinked. And so this topic fascinated me because I can really see that it's not going to be intuitive and it's not going to be easy. And the more I've dug into it, the more I've realized, you might think this is a good idea and let's go this way, and then you find something that's really counterintuitive or means that you're making the problem worse. And obviously we're talking about patients, and patients sit in pathways, and that whole thing has to be considered as well. And so the answer to your question, while I've gone on a bit about it, is that healthcare is a big emitter and a big contributor to the problem. It's a very wasteful system. It's been built on sterile, single-use, stop the patient being infected, maximum patient individual protection, and we've got to find the route to maximize the health gain in the round and maximize the reduction in emissions while keeping quality and patient care at the forefront of our minds. And I like a gnarly problem, and this is a gnarly problem, as they say in America, right?
That's right. Yeah, we once said that. I think maybe 1980s was when gnarly came
I'm
out
from
of
the 80s, so that's fine.
So I want to stay here, though, in this personal journey, because one of the things that we're seeing, even in the development of this event, this is the first sterile processing green focus event ever in the U.S. And it's been really curious as we've gotten the speakers together and we've begun talking to the audience on the other side of things, of how new of a topic this is. Not necessarily like that folks have never heard about it, but that they've never just really sat down and dug into what are the implications, just kind of what you said, how big is this problem, and then what are these initial steps to start fixing it. But I want to go back to that course that you mentioned, because that experience that you had in that 8-week course, I'm hoping is going to be a similar experience that some of our audience has in this event, in that this is the first time that they ever sat down, blocked out everything else, and really were confronted with what's going on and the impact that they could have on what's going on. So what was your first step out of that, right? So you're challenged in this course, inspired. What did you do 1, 2, 3 after that?
Okay. So the first thing is there's some real basic awakening moments or aha moments that I had. The very first question that the course asked us was, and we had to answer this, and it was really difficult, is net zero inevitable? Right? Now, what that means is net zero is literally we are emitting as much greenhouse gases into the atmosphere as the planet and everything that's going on is capable of absorbing. So we're not adding anything more to the atmosphere, which, by the way, is only 5 kilometers high, right? So if you set off from the surface of the planet, as if you were driving on a freeway, you would break out of our Earth's atmosphere in your car in 5 minutes. That's how small that little bubble is, right? I found that mind-blowing. So, net zero is apparently inevitable. And do you know why that is, Hank? Because one way or another, the planet will realign itself. So when people are talking about, we've got to save the planet, this isn't actually about saving the planet. This is about saving us as a species and our ability to thrive on this planet, right? And net zero is inevitable because one way or another, the climate and how the planet adjusts to what's being asked of it will sort of kill us off in the quantities needed for it to be able to align and continue. And that's sort of the harsh reality. Now, the other thing that I really thought was a aha moment was a quote that was attributed to Ken Boulding, who's an economist. And it was that anyone who thinks that you can have infinite growth in a finite environment is either a madman or an economist, right? And when you start thinking about that infinite growth and you look at the GDP chart, and you think, okay, what does that plot for GDP look like? And it just goes up and up and up forever. But yet you understand we're sitting on this planet that has a fixed everything, right? If it was a spaceship, what would we be doing? Oh, it is a bit of a spaceship, isn't it? This is our spaceship. So how can we conserve all the resource that's on it so that we can continue our way of life in a way that is not horrible and is positive, but which takes into account that finite reality. And then the other thing that really is relevant to this is that whole bit which is linear versus circular. And that was my other piece of the jigsaw puzzle, which is that in a linear economy, which is what we're in, on our finite planet, finite environment, there's nothing more once we've used it all up. What are we going to do, right? What we do at the moment is we dig something up out of the ground and we make something from it and we use it and then we throw it away or burn it, right? That's the linear model that we've got used to. And, chuck that into healthcare and, we have contaminated stuff and then you have to do the certain things with it and everything's all about that, right? The circular model, the circular economy, is where you take something out of the ground or, from a tree or whatever, right? And you use it, and then you use it for longer, you reuse it, you remake it, you recycle it, you take the components of it and you remake the thing that you made from it again. And, I really did realise we were completely miles off that in every aspect of our lives, in everything that we do. And in healthcare, as we discussed a bit earlier, the model is built on individual patient safety. And so everything's about that. And we need to try to circularize what we're doing in order to reach that goal of not treating this like an infinite planet.
Yeah, I think that insight around the patient-focused and not the population-focused at the same time, right? It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
So you're not arguing to ignore that, patient-centric mission of healthcare. You're just arguing we also can't ignore the population impact of all of these patient-centric decisions that we're making in healthcare. So I think that's a really interesting kind of way to categorize this. At the very beginning of this interview, you mentioned something that I actually was wanting to ask you. Part of this global insight and perspective that you're bringing to our event. Obviously, we've got a bunch of Americans over here trying to figure this thing out, and we're looking to Europe, we're looking to the UK, and we're saying, maybe let's just start. Are you ahead of the US in all these things? And if so, why and how? And you can start wherever you want to in that question.
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, we are ahead in the UK of pretty much everywhere, with the possible exception of the Nordics, right? Of Sweden and Norway and what have you, who are approaching this with equal enthusiasm, but from a maybe slightly different perspective. The reason that this is happening in the UK is because of government legislation and requirements, right? And in actual fact, they've been quite serious about net zero commitments as UK PLC, if you like, and as a result have written quite a lot of Crown commercial legislation that requires all of the companies doing business in this country to fulfill certain criteria to be allowed to do business. And in fact, healthcare was let off the hook a little bit to start off with because of the conundrums and difficulties that we've been discussing already. However, now the moment has arrived where if we want to do business with the NHS, then companies bidding for business, and this is the same for all government contracts, and this is how this has driven behaviour in certain ways, then you have to be fulfilling certain quite specific and explicit criteria, the latest one of which is that we've had to publish our emissions in scope 1 and 2, which I can come on to in a bit if you like, and 5 categories of scope 3. So these are the different types of things that where we emit greenhouse gas emissions by doing business, right? So that might be from our manufacturing or distribution of our products through to get how we operate as a entity in terms of a sales force or anything like that. How we interact with our customer, and then obviously the products that they use, how they use them, and what happens to them afterwards. So this is the same for all companies that operate in the UK. And in the Nordics, there's some requirements that are slightly different around packaging and disposal of them, and around certain substances that they don't want to be part of anything that is being disposed of or used. And so that's focused people's attention and mind in a very real way, because, you know, if you don't do it, you're not going to trade in the UK. Now, I think added into that, there's definitely been some things that have accelerated it. One of those things is that last year, we really did have the most incredibly hot summer. And for the first time ever in Britain, we had 2 days that were more than 40 degrees centigrade, which I think is like 110 Fahrenheit or something like that. I believe you guys are experiencing this right now in Texas and a few of the southern states. You've got a real unprecedented heat scenario going on. And so what that meant was that, you know, Britain, this green and pleasant land, turned into a sort of savannah, sort of desert. Everything was brown and everything was dying, and for some days of that month, nobody could leave their home even, because we're not set up for that, right? We're set up for, we need our woolly jumper on and our air and our central heating on. And it was really quite extreme, and everyone went, oh, hold on a minute. You know, this isn't good. This isn't how we want our lives to be in the future. So that was one thing. And off the back of that, definitely our press and our media have started to talk about this more. And from what I understand, you know, when things are happening, even with the wildfires that have been going on in Canada, and then how that's affected New York and other places along that part of America, there isn't always an immediate jumping to, this is climate change, this is caused by climate change, this is your future, we need to do something about it. Whereas I think over here that really is the case, and the general population, A, agree that this is what's going on, B, have got quite a lot of press and media and news and things coming at them all the time, reinforcing that. C, we actually have some real quite strong protests over here that really do make the news, and the government are very, very cross about it. But even so, you know, there's been quite disruptive protests that have brought it to everyone's attention. And I read something recently that said, whilst we all might complain about certain protests, for example, some of our motorways were shut because people glued themselves to, you know, parts of it, or there's various sporting events that have been disrupted, and with people chucking orange powder everywhere. These are all the Just Stop Oil people, right? Apparently, whether or not you get very irritated by this, Hank, the more irritated you get, the more you start to think, oh, this actually is a problem. So things like that, everything that I've described, I believe is contributing to people going, this is something we all need to sort out. We all need to contribute. We all need to do our bit. And so the population is, I think it's with it, you know, not 100%, but we'll find out in the next elections, when we have our elections, how with it they are. In our last council elections in 4 different councils through England, the Green Party won. Right? So that's, unprecedented.
I'm not that familiar with politics over there, right? But the Green Party, I'm assuming, is the one that's kind of fronting these sustainability conversations.
It's built on everything that's good for the environment, nature, and people from that healthy perspective.
Okay. Yeah. That's a really interesting kind of insights around the political impact, obviously, and it's a shame that this has to be a political conversation, because then you get rhetoric, and then you get people on both sides.
Yes.
And obviously, like as you described before, this we got one planet, right? We're all on the same team ultimately, because we're in the same spaceship.
Yes.
And
we're all on the same spaceship, Hank. That's correct.
Yeah. So it's kind of filtering what you were describing, through the American lens, and there's different philosophies and there's different political insights, obviously, over here for all of this as well. But that top-down approach that you were describing at the beginning of, hey, this started with legislation, and then it kind of drove that action on the commercial side, on the healthcare side, and then you saw the groundswell because of things like the summer and the protests and other things that are now kind of starting to meet in the middle. And I know in the U.S., like certain parts of the U.S., you're starting to see more of that legislation type stuff come through, like on the West Coast, out in California. That's probably one of the more healthcare sustainability aggressive states in terms of legislation.
Well, they drove EVs in the world, right? I mean, they drove that whole initiative through their taxation policy.
Yeah. So at the end, though, you were kind of answering maybe one of my follow-up questions is the population at large you're describing is starting to get with the program, I guess, if you will, but just kind of get more involved and active in these discussions. Do you see, in comparing kind of the population at large and then your users in the healthcare space, so let's say like NHS, is your pulse that they're more in favor of and pushing the sustainability mindset, or are they about average with the rest of the culture out there? Kind of what's your pulse on that?
Yeah, so I would say the NHS are more invested in this than the general population. They've got real metrics and focus. They've got sustainability leads in all the different hospitals. I heard a statistic recently, which is that within the health system and its surrounding structures, like the government and various different NGOs and everything that's going on that supports it, there are 100,000 people working on sustainability within our health system, right? I mean, when I meet people from the health system that know about this, and I meet them all the time, they're super knowledgeable, they're super motivated. And some of our traditional customers, clinicians, nurses, fall well into that category. There's a group called Doctors for the Environment. They know more about this than I will ever know. I've worked on a number of documents in this space. The most recent one was to do with procurement and sustainability for Ireland, because I sit on the board of Health Tech Ireland. And when all of the different stakeholders of those different stakeholders that contributed to that document, the Doctors for the Environment were by far the most knowledgeable and the most militant. And everyone in the health system is motivated. And this topic, it's a bit like I was saying to you, the scales fall off your eyes and you start to look at linear versus circular. You start to look at how you're behaving and you're like, goodness me, what is this? And in the health system, it's coming at you all of the time because, you know, you're a nurse in an operating room. You're just continually opening stuff, using it, throwing the packet away, throwing the thing away. You know, it's coming at you constantly. And hospitals have these huge deliveries all the time, you know, and then they've got to unpack it all, and then there's all that packaging that comes off it. And it's right in their face. So they're really motivated and they really know a lot about it. And I you know, this isn't a fad, okay? It's not going away. It's only going to get more and more dramatic. And I was talking to someone from Deloitte about this, who are very involved as a consultancy. Lots of very knowledgeable people in all these different consultancies, Boston Consulting Group, Deloitte, you know, a PwC, Schneider Electric, right? They all know a lot. They all can see the future. And this guy from Deloitte said, well, there's 56 different health systems looking at the NHS plan right now, right? As we speak. So that's 56 countries out of all the countries in the world that are definitely going ahead with this. We see things happening in legislation all of the time. So things like France, for example, right? So France has banned, it's not in healthcare, but it's all relevant. They've banned all flights that are internal that are going to be less than 2.5 hours. You have to take a train. There are no flights anymore between different cities in that are 2.5 hours or less. Gone. Then all new car parks that are being built, they have to build solar panels over the spaces so that it shades the space, which is very future resilient, right? And that shading of the space powers whatever around, because that's one of those areas where it's not going to look nice anyway, is it? So you might as well put some solar panels on it. So this is all legislated for now. You know, these are the sorts of things that I think are going on that are really, people are starting to get more and more aware of and go, that's a good idea. Why didn't we do that before? You know, so yeah, I think I've gone off topic, haven't I, Hank? Sorry.
No, I think that's exactly getting us into one of the next segments here that I want to talk about, the strategies around sustainable healthcare, because we've been given a lot of background and you're just kind of going into some of the ancillary strategies outside of healthcare.
Yes.
But before we get there, you also alluded to something that I want to give you one more chance to kind of dive into, and that's what is that kind of practical impact that you're alluding to, like in the OR space of they're opening, and in like the supply chain, they're getting deliveries and got all these packages.
Okay.
Like, what are those kinds of things
What do
when
they
we
look
say?
like? Okay, so there's lots and lots of things. So the first thing to know is that when you're sending goods around the world, the slower you do it, the less emissions there are, right? So if you fly something, mega emissions. If you send it on a cargo ship, very 900 times less emissions, right? Number one. So everybody's got used to everything's an emergency. Oh, I've got to have the product tomorrow morning. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Can you do next morning delivery, right? This has all got to stop. It's got to be organised and it's got to be consolidated. So the other thing is how many times you're sending all that stuff. How many times is vehicles going in and out? How many times are you boom, 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 right? So there's that. Then there is the waste of devices and stuff, drugs, whatever, that go out of date, that never get used, right? This is the number one cardinal sin of environmental sustainability. You don't invest all of that stuff and energy and substances, make something that's capable of saving a human life, and then throw it away, and actually it gets incinerated, probably via an aircraft flying it off somewhere else to where it gets incinerated. You know, it's bonkers. So the more you start looking at things through those sustainability spectacles, I've got mine on at the moment, the more you start to see, well, that's crazy. Why are we doing that? Why are we flying that from there to there and then back again just to destroy it? These are all things that are mad, right? So get rid of the speed of delivery, get rid of the numbers of delivery, get rid of the waste of products going out of date. All of those things that happen, like, oh, I accidentally opened the wrong product. Oh dear, never mind. Or the next level is, here's what happens in an operating room. We've got the contaminated thing, you know, what you put your contaminated, it's quite late here, Hank, sorry, I start using the word thing a lot at this point. You've got the contaminated bins, and then you've got the recycling bins. You know, some places I've been, the recycling bins are way down the corridor. You know, these theatre staff, they're dealing with patients, and they're in the middle of something quite complicated. They don't want to have to walk down the corridor to put their stuff in a bin. The actual separating that out correctly, again, you know, requires habitual thoughts, because otherwise, again, you're in that emergency situation. You don't want to, you're not thinking, oh, which bit does this bit go in? You know, you need to make it easy for people. You need to be able to make it simple for people. And there's obviously all the rules around, well, I'm the scrub nurse, I've touched this, the patient, therefore I can't put that in, it goes into for incineration. So all of that contaminated stuff goes for incineration. So those are the low-hanging fruit wins. And then you move into thinking about that circular economy piece, you know, thinking about, well, is this stuff, does everything have to be single use? Because actually I was a salesperson up in Glasgow when everything changed to single use. That's how old I am. And I'll tell you the moment it happened, right? I was going into an operating room in Glasgow Royal Hospital, one of the busiest operating theatre suites in Britain, right? Everyone's ill in Scotland all the time because it's so cold and wet and windy, or it used to be, right?
No offense to our Scottish
yeah, and
watchers out there.
Yeah, and I walked in, and the lady in charge of theatres went, Michelle, we're going to have to change everything over to single use because of mad cow disease, right? Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, because we cannot guarantee sterility and kill those prion proteins. And I can't have patients catching mad cow disease from another patient we've operated on. And like within a week, boom, it was done.
Yeah, right.
And we're now sort of going to have to reverse that, because now we're talking about individual risk versus population risk, and something about this is going to have to shift. And there will be things that we will always be single use, and then we have to get really good at recycling those components, right? There'll be things that maybe we can use more and then recycle. There'll be things that we have to extend the life of, that we have to take a good hard look and go, well, does it really run out in, you know, is this MRI scanner really only good for 10 years, or can we update it a bit and do this? And so there's all of those different things that we have to think about and categorise. I don't think we've got all of the data to do that yet, Hank, but when you start looking, you start seeing opportunities. I remember one of my colleagues from another company, because I'm the chair of the Association of British Health Tech Industry Sustainability Group, right, which is like our AdvaMed. And I always go on about this all the time, obviously, as you can tell. And he came running in and he said, Michelle, you're going to be so proud of me. I realised that all of our plastic tubing, we sent it to customers in an extra plastic bag that was completely pointless. So overnight, I've cancelled 1 million plastic bags on a weekly basis. I was like, wow, that's amazing. But the more you start looking, the more you see that you can do. Yeah?
Yeah, so that's a great example of the question that I kind of set us up with before, on examples of these forward-thinking strategies. They're going to impact what it is we're talking about. And that example of the plastic bags, like, you know, there may be some folks looking at that, well, that's not that sexy of an idea. It's not, you know, big. I'm not going to do like a big press release necessarily about that. But the impact of 1 million bags, I mean, that's pretty substantial. So what are some of those other examples, just to get folks' minds kind of going here?
There are examples of reprocessing, so you can, instead of using a product once, you can use it maybe 7 or 8 times. Legislatively and regulatory wise, things start to get a bit tricky sometimes, because then, once, for example, a single-use device has been reprocessed, then who's responsible when it goes wrong, right? There's definitely there are programs that you can do that are about how you manage the stock within hospitals, and I foresee a time when we will all collaborate in a way that we sort of happened a bit with COVID. So, for example, to guarantee resilient supply through COVID, some of the hospitals built central distribution hubs, and they've kept some of them. So they've got their, take London, right? London's got its central distribution hub that everyone delivers their products to, and then with electric vehicles they all go out, or sometimes along the river Thames as well, and they deliver things in a much more ecologically friendly way from that central hub, and they can manage that stock and A, resilient supply, but B, the emissions associated with moving all of those goods around. In the future, in America, you've got a great situation because you don't have to have paper instructions for use. You can have digital electronic instructions for use. Here in Europe, at the moment, we have instructions for use printed on paper, put in all our medical devices, printed in God knows how many languages, right? And that can weigh up to 30% of the weight of what's being shipped around the world. And then they get opened, and the clinician's not reading the instructions for use to learn how to use the device, right? You're in trouble if that's the case. So 99 times out of 100 that will just go straight in the bin. And so we're looking to drive changes in legislation and allow everyone to do things differently. But in the short term, what you can do is you can not put your instructions for use in at the start of the process. You put them in at the latest distribution hub when the product's going to go out the door, and then only in one language, for example. Sounds little, but if that changes 28% of the weight of your goods you're shipping around the world, that's not little, right? So, will that do for now?
I love those ideas. Yeah. Again, going back to the plastic bag example and then ending on those instructions example, it's the kind of mindset. It's a mind change. It's not that you're changing the quality of the product or even the user experience, but it is, hey, what about this process? We're used to looking at, waste in the process, wasted steps, wasted time, all kinds of inefficiencies. But now you're looking at what's the waste or the potential ecological impact of the waste. And hey, if we put these IFUs in at the end of the process as opposed to the beginning, then you're shipping them a lot less all over the world before they get to the end user. That's just such a powerful new way of thinking through a lot of these processes that many of us can control. And like you brought up one of the early examples that, reprocessing of devices is one of those low-hanging fruits. And obviously in sterile processing, that's our world. The vast majority of our duties is around those reprocessable devices that can be reprocessed in the facility. And then I know there's a whole other world out there of those items that are captured at the point of use, then taken outside and reprocessed or reworked, as you described, to then come back into the healthcare setting. But because of that, a lot of these conversations, it's really important for sterile processing folks to be paying attention, because if, as you described, the mad cow disease, the shift, to single use is now coming back the other direction, and we're building new departments, for instance. Well, that could impact the size of our departments, or the number of equipment or the room for storage if we're going to be using more reusable instrumentation and devices versus things that maybe never come through our workflow today, and they're just going straight to the clinician, into the trash, or being captured otherwise. So all of that is such a big conversation with implications, but the small wins that you described are totally within reach, right? Like, you can make a decision today to stop sending extra bags. You can make a decision today to stop sending 20 different languages with your IFUs. That's a pretty easy fix.
And things like, look at where you manufacture, look at where you sterilize, look at where you distribute from. When you're going to redo it, think about it. Go, okay, well, where should it all be to minimize the impact? And these things will save money as well, right? All of these things I've described save money. They save cost, and don't underestimate that as a driver in a world where all the cost of goods are going up.
Well, that's an important claim here, because my next question was, what's the challenge at that healthcare facility level, at the system level, when they're hearing these sustainability arguments? I understand with NHS, it's the law, right? So maybe there's not as much pushback as in other countries, but in general, kind of around the globe, what do you see as the biggest roadblocks or issues with implementing some of the things that we're talking about at this health system level? What are people pushing back with the most?
One of the big areas of concern at the moment is life cycle assessments, right? So this is where you sort of carbon footprint each individual product as accurately as you can. And then there's the whole argument of life cycle assessment within the patient pathway. So what actually are the parameters of a life cycle assessment? Where do you start? Where do you end? So there isn't really any standard methodology, and you end up comparing apples with pears a lot of the time. I think that this is something that we all need to collaborate on, a little bit like the reprocessing piece, right? Because if you look at all the medical devices in the world, there'll only be a certain selection and section that are possible to re-sterilize and use again, right? So I think somebody quoted to me that they thought it would be maybe 7% of everything. And the other things, you're going to have to do something different. It's not going to work. So part of this conundrum is reframing this into buckets of categories where you go, okay, well, this is the category that everyone might come after us for reprocessing. This is the category where we're going to have to refurbish. This is the category where we're going to have a really good service plan in place, right? This is the category where we need to look at the lifetime of our devices and see, can they be extended legitimately without worrying about quality. This is the category where really they've got to be single use. So how are we going to approach it from a breaking them down and recycling all the components perspective, and what does that look like, and how will that work in the real world? So one of the things we're allegedly going to be asked about is to carbon footprint our products, to do a life cycle analysis, so we can say, here is the embedded carbon in our product at the point at which it gets to the UK, right? So it's from the manufacturing of it and getting it to you, NHS. And then in theory, what they're going to do is compare these like devices and see which one's got the best carbon footprint. But, there's real problems with this, because it's not just like a pharmaceutical either. So a pharmaceutical, it gets prescribed and then the patient takes it, and that's it. And it either makes you better or it doesn't. And you will have a patient pathway that's added on the end of it. But you don't need any skill to prescribe it. You don't need any skill to take it. You don't need any skill to execute its use, right? You just need to open the packet and swallow them. So when it's a medical device, you've obviously got the user, they're skilled, they may be used to this specific thing, using this specific thing in this specific way might be really much better than using another thing that they're not used to. There's all of that stuff, right? Then there's what they like using and what's easy to use, and that all contributes to it, none of which has got anything to do with what the embedded carbon is, right? And then you've got what happens during the operation and then post-operatively.
Right.
So, you know, if you take a device, it might have 3 kilograms of embedded carbon in it, but 1 hour of surgery is 32 kilograms of carbon, right? Carbon dioxide equivalent. So, you know, if you knock an hour of surgery off, and that's so high, by the way, because of anaesthetics, for example, and all these fixed energy costs of running your operating room, and so, you know, there's all of these unintended consequences all over the place, and you've got to be really careful. So, I think these are some of the challenges that I see coming down the track. I did hear that if you have a disposable versus a reusable that are exactly the same, it's between 30 and 50% less embedded carbon in it, and that's a fairly standard statistic. So in the reusable, will always have less embedded carbon in it versus the disposable if it's like for like. Almost without exception. There are probably some exceptions. There are some places where you might manufacture, for example, that use coal-powered energy. This is very bad, and you know, you won't get a good result that way. But outside of that, that's a sort of thing to consider. But then if you're really good at using the single use and you're really rubbish at using the reusable, even though it looks like it's the same, right? Then it just starts to get difficult. And trust me, I really, you know, I'm not invested in one thing or another particularly. I just want to find the route to success. Yeah. Right.
What's what's been funny, even in me sitting here listening to your answers, back to the point about the slower you ship something, the less of an impact it has on these things. And it got me thinking too, like we talked about California with electric vehicles and such. And but what I also know about California that you may or may not know is many of our healthcare clinicians are commuting a very long way to get to work in California in these hospitals. I mean, crazy commutes, like 1.5 hours of drive time or more there and back, right? So you're talking 2-3 hours. And this is not, you know, blowing through the interstate. This is sitting in traffic and crawling along on the LA freeway. And it's really curious if we're going to get serious about this from that health system perspective. When are hospitals going to sit down and say, okay, so where do our workers live? And how do we incentivize, how do we get creative about getting them closer to the point of delivering their own service? Like we've been talking about products this whole time, but like I'm sure I'm not the first person to actually think about that, but
no, I've got some interesting facts for you about that. So one of the things, so the NHS is counting its emissions, right? And they're stepping outside of what's called greenhouse gas protocol for precisely the reason you are describing. So they're counting their scope 1 and 2 emissions, the things that they're responsible for with heating their hospital and refrigerating things and, the electricity that they're using, right? And they're counting their scope 3 emissions, which is all of the things that are supplying them, like all the different companies, the bread rolls, the drapes, the stuff that they're not in control of. And then that's greenhouse gas protocol standard. Outside of it is travel to and from the hospital site, right? So they're counting those emissions. How many people come in and out of their hospital sites? And one of the reasons they're doing that is that up to 5% of all traffic on Britain's roads is as a result of the activities of our health service. Right? So it's responsible for 5% of emissions, 5% of traffic on the roads. And this is why companies are starting to think about, not only are they looking into remote support, remote patient management, again, a thing that happened through COVID, that we've managed to keep some of it. But, there's lots of technology out there that really does help that. And as long as you've got a decent Wi-Fi connection, you can have 3D specs on, and in real time, somebody can show you how to screw this thing on and take that thing off and put that in there and press this button. And, right. And these are things that we used through COVID because we had to. And now we're continuing to use because it stops that in and out, in and out, in and out. Peer-to-peer training, surgeons training other surgeons from 2 different operating rooms, across the land or even in another country. All of that is all possible. But to get these things into perspective, the flying is the real killer, right? So domestic flights really are the real killer. International flights are a whole other thing. But if you just there's a slide I put up in some of my talks here in Europe, and it has the carbon emission impact, the reduction impact of different things you can do as a person, right? And so the first one, the littlest bar is to become vegan, yeah, and then the next one is to go car free, right? You don't have a car. And the next one that's bigger than all of that is do not take 3 UK to mainland Europe flights a year, right? So not taking 3 UK to mainland Europe flights is more impactful than you never having a car.
What about my holidays?
Well, you just have to go cycling or something. I don't know. But this is the thing, right? This is the whole topic we're talking about. What are we all prepared to do? Yep. What are we prepared to give up? How are we prepared to live? What do we consider success? You can go on your holidays in your EV, Hank, if you like. You've got lovely places to go in America on holiday. Right. You can make that part of your trip, but this all contributes to the whole business thing as well. Business travel. If I look at Michelle's carbon footprint, right? So I put into one of these little calculator sites, just the basic activities that Michelle, living a Western lifestyle, has. How often do you eat meat? How do you have a car? How big is your house? Right? All this stuff. You put it in. When I do that, even with me trying, I need 5 planets for me, right? To sustain, if everyone on the planet lived like me, if every man and woman on the planet lived like me, we would need 5 planets. I add in my business travel, 7.5 planets. Yeah. Right? So, when I talk to people about this, they're like, well, actually, I go cycling with the kids every weekend, but I don't think about jumping on a plane on a Monday morning to go to this meeting, when actually I could have got the train, and how we schedule things. AstraZeneca, I believe, have given all of their employees a personal carbon budget. Wow. When you've used it up, you can't go anywhere. You have to think. You have to decide, is this really important? And then you have to market that in a different way to your customers. Hello, my favorite clinician, you are one of the 3 people I'm flying to this year. Right. That's how important you are, right? These are the things that we have to start thinking about and accepting, and also embracing and going, yippee, I don't have to be flying every single week around the world and not being with my family and living out of a hotel and a suitcase and getting a bad back from traveling around and sitting in an airport for hours because there aren't enough staff there and they can't get us through customs and all of the stuff that's going on, It's an interesting time, isn't it?
It's really, I know I told you before we came on air here, in some of our conversations, it's been really enlightening as folks begin thinking about all the implications of what we're talking about. Like, it's one thing to, high level policy, this is what health systems should be doing. But then, when it comes to, but what about you? What are you doing in your life, in in your role in your health system and all the decisions you're making and the impact that that has. And just last week, we had a big virtual event that we were hosting through Beyond Clean, and it was all on social media. And I went to AI and I asked, hey, what are the good reasons, to attend this digital event on social media? And it was reach and audience, networking, etc. But then one of the last things it said was, and it's also a sustainable solution to reduce travel and the impact that has on emissions in the planet and everything else. And I was just like, oh man, that is so timely. And why didn't I think about that before? But you're right. We're flying around for these big conferences all the time. We're flying around. And in the name of healthcare, we're doing it. And then we're having all these sustainability conversations on the site. So I think really important insights that you shared today, and really challenging all of us across the globe to think in ways that are going to challenge ourselves, they're going to challenge our health systems, challenge our politicians, and that it's okay to look at each other to see what we're doing right and maybe what we want to do differently to continue to experiment, because as you also said, nobody has it all figured out yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I want my overriding message to be human beings are designed to work towards a purpose, right? That's what we like to do. So this is a really good purpose, and it's a purpose that absolutely necessitates collaboration from groups that aren't used to working together. And that level of collaboration will change society and our lives for the better. And so I sort of challenge you to have a go and see what you can achieve.
All right. Well, that was Michelle Sullivan, and I want to thank you all for tuning into this session. I hope you were inspired and challenged as much as me, and I got a feeling that you were. And we're looking forward to hearing from you and the decisions and impacts that you make out of this session and out of this conference to go back to your facility to start thinking differently, and even more importantly, to start doing differently as well. And with that, we're going to turn it back over to the host.